I'm William Kilmer, or Billy Kilmer, and of course Dr. Merchant is my mentor and advisor, and I am kind of continuing that heritage. I am a Milgard Scholar at the University of Washington, Tacoma, and so what we were doing is taking it beyond just conceptualizing, just knowing what brand heritage is. We wanted to know, is it possible to leverage it? For instance, over the past several years, you can see the evolution, I guess, of cell phones or mobile phones. And it's something that actually started with the phones that they used in war. They had to carry a full backpack with a phone that someone could use. So over time, companies have gotten better and better at representing themselves and actually using that brand heritage. A good example is Citigroup, or Citibank. And what they've done is in 1812 is when they started. They have over 200 years of brand heritage. Heritage that they've actually leveraged. They're talking about in 1904, they helped build the Panama Canal. 1977, they were the first company to come out with ATM machines. 2011, they were the first company to have a credit card in the Google Wallet. So they were they're showing that they have this heritage, as Michael talked about, from the past to the present, and that in the future they're going to continue to be innovative in that way. So today what we're going to talk about is a little bit about the current view of brand heritage based on a literature review. We're going to talk about what questions that left unanswered. We're going to see what we did to answer those questions and our methodology. We're going to talk a little bit about the findings, and then we're going to talk about what this implies for managers and marketers. In Erd et al., he talked about brand heritage. Once again, we mentioned it encompasses 3 different time periods: the past, the present, and the future. And why that's important is because it maintains that there is a necessity to have consistency throughout the whole process, throughout the whole time that a company exists. So if it's not maintaining that consistency over a period of time, it's going to lose that heritage. It's going to lose the value of that heritage. A good example of that was the Mini Cooper. And the next example there that you can see talked about after purchasing the Mini Cooper, BMW was actually able to use the heritage of it to generate sales, to actually increase and augment their sales. And it wasn't because they put the BMW logo on it. It was because they said, this is the Mini. You remember it from such movies as, I can't remember the movie now, The Italian Job. You remember it from all these different things. It's cool. It's a brand symbol. It's something that people really like. And they were able to leverage that to generate more sales. Another company was Carnival, which actually purchased the Cunard line. And that one's a very interesting one because Cunard had a history of luxury. You might remember the White Star line, which Cunard was a part of back in 1912 when they built the Titanic. Well, it maintained that luxury brand for many years. It did start to lose it, but once Carnival purchased that line, they were able to turn it around and say, this is the history and the heritage of this brand. It's a luxury brand. They updated the image a little bit to make it a little bit newer and a little bit nicer and cleaner and more modern. But they leveraged that heritage to continue to make it a luxury brand and to continue to show that it was a luxury brand and generate and augment sales. Another company that actually has a very interesting heritage is Kodak. It's been around for a very long time, and yet despite declaring bankruptcy, it has a lot of equity and a lot of heritage. The question is, can that heritage be leveraged? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about some of the findings that we had. Something that you might notice here is that in 1969, AT&T was a company that had a heritage with the Bell Laboratories. They were the company that created the telephone transistor. They were huge, and that's why they actually had that Bell logo. If you look at the current AT&T brand, it doesn't have the Bell logo. Why is that? It's because Lucent Technologies actually has Bell Laboratories, the company that created the first transistor for the telephone. And yet, if you go to AT&T's website, they will tell you that they're the company that created the first telephone transistor. They're using their heritage from back when they were still Ma Bell and AT&T to create cells in today's world. So a company can still leverage a heritage using its name, even if it doesn't actually have that full heritage. And of course, once again, we did talk about the Cunard line. So it does kind of raise several questions for us. It does make us wonder, is heritage an important factor for purchases? Is there a reason for a company to mention its heritage in its advertising and its everyday life and on the internet to show that that can be an important factor. Also, do brands need to maintain currency? Do they need to be current in their branding? Can foreign brands take their heritage from their country and leverage it here in the United States, for instance? Can a bankrupt brand have heritage? We just mentioned Kodak, for instance. And what does that mean for a brand with heritage? To answer these questions, we actually created a focus group. We had 7 consumers who gave us qualitative research. They gave us very deep answers about how they felt about particular brands. It took about 90 minutes, and these were consumers in the Tacoma area. So they gave us kind of a local feel for what we were experiencing. We transcribed the discussions, and then we reviewed that in depth to really get a feel of how people can relate to brand heritage. A good example in the role of history is what Janet told us. She said Craftsman was a company that exhibited a lot of heritage. She said in order to be around that long and to have such a good reputation, it has to have a good product. So that's why she currently purchases Craftsman tools. Another one was Joe. He mentioned the role of innovation. So we talked about past, present, future. Joe was talking about the future portion of it. You have to maintain currency and continue to innovate. He said Gatorade was a brand that stuck out to his mind. He said, think about how long they've been around, what they had originally to what they have now. They have made the innovations that make them the more favorable of the energy drinks. So what we did is we did try to spread out this branding over several different categories. For instance, sports brands. And what we found within sports brands is it was important to have a brand heritage. The New York Giants, for instance, this is the brand that we kind of focused on. They've got a long heritage. And most recently, most currently, they have a winning heritage. And that was very important. But what we found is that most of the time, family history played a larger part than the actual current winners. Joe mentioned to us that the New England Patriots were actually the team that he tended to follow, the team that was his family team. So for a while there was a brand that was actually doing very well, the Green Bay Giants, when they had, or the Green Bay Packers, when they had Brett Favre, that recency allowed him to change brands. He went to a different brand, but then he went back to the New England Patriots because it was the family brand, the brand that his family constantly enjoyed. Leibniz is a German butter biscuit. They have a lot of history in Germany. What we found out by asking people, can they leverage that history in Germany to sell in America? But what they said was, well, we don't know if it's tasty. We know that Germans make really good cars, but they're not known for their really good butter biscuit. So what was important about that biscuit to them? It wasn't the history of it. It wasn't the heritage. Whisk, in the Tacoma area, is a brand that's little known. Tide tends to be the preferred brand. So it was something that, for them, their family heritage with that brand, with Tide, was more important than Whisk being an innovative brand. They'd always heard Whisk does really well for a ring around the collar, but they've never thought of it as a brand that they use for everyday washing. Bank of America was a very divided issue. It's also a brand that has a lot of heritage. But there was one person, Joe, who did not trust it at all, based on his history with it. And then there was another person, Janet, who was telling us that it was very good. She had very good experience with it and felt it could be trusted. When we showed them a commercial, one said that Joe said that it was a snow job. He felt that they were trying to pull the fleece over his eyes, and he couldn't trust Bank of America for trying to say what they were trying to say, that they were a brand with heritage and that they really cared for the smaller consumer. And then, of course, we talked about Kodak. And that's a brand that everyone mentioned. If Kodak decided to innovate today and come out with a new product, they would all purchase it. Because the history, the consistency with that brand from past to present and hopefully into the future is a brand that they would continue to purchase. So what are the implications? Should managers and marketers use branding? What we really found out was that it was important at times. There are times where branding can play a large role, or the brand heritage can play a large role in allowing someone to purchase a product. And there are other times where the history of the brand may not be really good, and you may not want to come out with your own name on that brand or to try to leverage that brand heritage. It might be better to go with a new brand product. So this is kind of what we found. What we want to know now is, do you have any questions about brand heritage and leveraging brand heritage? Yes?
What would you do next as part of the study if you wanted to continue?
if you wanted to continue it, it would definitely require more focus groups, probably around the country. Because if you're talking about brand heritage, you really need to know a larger population segment. You need to know in the South, is it the same way? Do they feel the same? Janet's actually from the South, and her sports brand was the Saints, and so she felt very strongly about it. And that's kind of the thing. You really need to find out more from the consumers if that really does play a large role based on the type of brand. If it's sports, sometimes it plays more of a role in family. If it's your detergents, sometimes it just depends on the actual brand. So we need to find out if specific brand lines need to have a heritage or not. So, yes, sir.
So do you know of many cases where brands use their heritage in different ways in different regions, maybe because they have a different brand heritage in a different region?
Yeah, I know, for instance, the company I'm currently working for, I'm not going to use names here, they have, on the East Coast, they tend to use their own name a lot more than they do on the West Coast, because on the West Coast, they do come across as a brand with a bad heritage, with a bad history. So what they're currently trying to do is they're trying to change that by creating a new brand. They've actually come out with a brand, so I'm spearheading that brand, kind of pushing it into the market, so that people, the very first thing that we introduce ourselves as is that new brand, rather than what they were before. They've actually got over 100 years of experience in producing the products that they produce, but on the West Coast, they still come across as a brand that no one wants to purchase. So. Yes?
Oh, that's a question. I'm not sure if it's relevant, but how important is brand leverage compared to other factors that affect sales, like price and quality?
That would definitely be something that we'd need to research. It seems that from what our focus group results were, with some brands, it's definitely the heritage. Sports brands especially, definitely, it didn't make a difference if they were, buying a sports branded shirt for $100 for their team as compared to if it was cheaper on another team, $15 for another team, they still wouldn't purchase the other team, they'd purchase their team. But that heritage did play a certain factor in certain cases, but we would definitely have to do more research to uncover where that dividing line is. What types of brands would require that and which types would not. Yeah. Any other questions?
All right.
Thank you so much.